The boy's head rested against Samir's chest, blood staining his shirt as he ran through the crowded bazaar. The hospital was a mile away, and every step felt like a lifetime. People stared, some whispered, but no one moved fast enough to help. By the time he reached the emergency ward, his breath was ragged, his legs burning. Doctors rushed forward, taking the child from his arms. Samir collapsed against the wall, sweat dripping, heart pounding with fear. Moments later, the doors burst open. Kareem, the mechanic who had once been his employer, stormed in, panic etched across his face. When his eyes landed on Samir, standing blood-stained and trembling, he froze. You saved my son?" Kareem's voice cracked. Samir looked down, struggling for words. He was hurt. "I just did what anyone should have done." Kareem's hands shook as he covered his face. The man who had mocked compassion, who had sneered at Samir's kindness, now stood humbled by it. Over the next few days, Kareem visited Samir often. He no longer carried the arrogance of an employer. Instead, he came with gratitude heavy in his voice. "You worked for me for years," Kareem said one evening, his eyes lowered. "I never paid you fairly. I mocked you for being soft. And still you saved my son." "What?" Samir's reply was quiet but steady. "Because compassion doesn't choose. It doesn't ask if someone deserves it. It just speaks, and we listen." Kareem's eyes glistened. For the first time, Samir saw not a cruel master but a man carrying his own regrets. Compassion had softened him too. News of Samir's act spread quickly. People admired his courage, but more than that, they began to question themselves. Why had they stood by when a child bled in the street? Why had it taken one young man to act when dozens watched? The story traveled beyond Nurabad, reaching community leaders, teachers, even local officials. Soon, Samir was invited to speak at a small gathering organized for youth. Nervous, he stood before the crowd, clutching the paper where he had scribbled notes. But when he looked at the eager faces, his fear faded. "I am not a hero," he began. "I am just someone who listens when compassion speaks. Too often, we walk past the hungry, the sick, the broken, thinking someone else will help. But what if compassion was waiting for you to answer? What if hope depends on your one act of kindness?" His words, simple yet heartfelt, rippled through the audience. Applause filled the hall, but more importantly, resolve filled their hearts. Encouraged by the response, Samir shared his vision with Farid, the wealthy workshop owner who had given him his new job. "Sir, I dream of creating a center where children can study for free, where families can eat, where compassion becomes a way of life." Farid listened carefully, then placed a hand on Samir's shoulder. "You have the heart, Samir. I have the resources. Let us build this together." With Farid's support and donations from others inspired by Samir's story, an old warehouse in Nurabad was transformed. Walls were painted bright, shelves filled with books, and a small kitchen set up to serve warm meals. They named it the House of Compassion. At its opening, dozens of children rushed inside, their laughter filling the air. Parents wept with gratitude. Samir stood at the doorway, tears in his own eyes, whispering to himself, "When compassion speaks, lives change." But growth brought challenges. Funds were often short, and the center's needs outpaced donations. Samir worked long hours at the workshop, then spent evenings teaching, organizing, and feeding families. His body ached, his health wavered, but he refused to give up. Sometimes he doubted. At night, lying awake, he wondered, "Am I strong enough? Can compassion really feed so many?" But then he would hear the laughter of children who once begged on streets now reciting poems, or see mothers carrying baskets of food home, their eyes shining with relief. And he knew, compassion was not about being strong. It was about never turning away. Years passed, and the House of Compassion grew into a beacon. Volunteers came from across the city. Children who had once learned their first alphabets under Samir's guidance now returned as young teachers. The ripple had become a wave. One crisp winter morning, Samir sat with Noor, the once injured puppy now grown into a loyal dog, watching children play. His mother, healthier with steady medicine, sewed clothes for the center. Aisha, no longer a child, prepared for university with dreams of becoming a doctor. Samir's life was far from easy, but it was full of meaning, full of love, full of the quiet power of compassion. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Samir walked through the bazaar where his journey had once felt hopeless. He saw a young boy, thin, tired, carrying a sack of empty bottles. The boy stumbled, spilling them across the ground as people brushed past without stopping. Samir knelt, helping him gather the bottles. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Imran," the boy whispered. Samir handed him a piece of bread from his bag and said, "Come to the House of Compassion tomorrow. You'll find food, books, and friends waiting." The boy's eyes widened, hope flickering. As he nodded, Samir felt the familiar warmth in his chest. Compassion had spoken again, and once more, he had listened. The moral of this story is, when compassion speaks, reminds us that compassion is not weakness, it is the greatest strength. True change begins not with wealth or power, but with a single act of kindness. One heart listening to compassion can awaken hundreds more, creating ripples that transform entire communities.